Willem de Kooning, who was born on April 24th, 1904, was a Dutch-born American painter who was one of the leading exponents of abstract expressionism, particularly the form known as action painting. In 1916, de Kooning was apprenticed to a firm of commercial artists and decorators, and at around the same time was enrolled in night classes at the Rotterdam Academy of Fine Arts and Techniques, which he studied for 8 years. In 1920, he went to work for the art director of a large department store. In 1926, he entered the United States as a stowaway and eventually settled in Hoboken, New Jersey, and supported himself as a house painter. And in 1927, moved to a studio in Manhattan and came under the influence of the artist, connoisseur, and art critic John Graham and the painter Arshile Gorky, who became one of his closest friends. Kooning painted women regularly in the 40s, and you can interpret female body shapes in his early abstract paintings. It wasn't until the 50s that he began to explore the subject of women, exclusively. In the summer of that year, he began Woman 1, which took him 2 years to finish. He then continued painting women, which led him to his first major woman painting, called Seated Woman, which was undoubtedly influenced by Arshile Gorky. In the late 50s, de Kooning temporarily left aside his preoccupation with women and began to explore landscape, although there often seemed to be few direct references to landscapes in his paintings. These landscape paintings between 1950 and 1960 were made during the period in which de Kooning and Franz Kline shared a relationship of mutual influences.
They say Willem de Kooning was an abstract expressionist because he was a founding artist of that new New York movement. He didn't call himself that, though, and said in 1955, "Words and labels are very confusing. We need definitions. I'm not an abstract expressionist, but I express myself." After de Kooning moved to East Hampton, New York, seeking to work in greater peace and isolation, whose name was writ in water, takes nature as its theme. Water was a favorite subject of de Kooning, and he devised a rapid technique of broad impasto strokes with frayed edges, speckled with drips to convey its fluidity and breaking movement. More open compositions, a less cluttered palette, and looser liquid brush strokes reveal a painter relieved of the nervous claustrophobic atmosphere of city life and newly at peace with his rural surroundings. At the end of his life, that paring down to structural senses becomes more radical than ever. In reproduction, these paintings always look like thinned out paint over blank canvas. They are not at all. This is paint laid on thick with vast areas blocked out by large thick sheets of titanium white. There is a lot of controversy over how much of these final paintings is de Kooning's work and how much is the work of his assistants. How much of this work is creation of his imagination, and how much is it shaped by his growing decrepitude and Alzheimer's? Whether the assistants painted most of these or not, de Kooning was clearly in charge, and they were taking orders. Kooning stopped painting entirely after 1987 and closed his studio. He finally died in 1997 at the age of 92 and after a career of more than 70 years. Willem de Kooning was the Dutch-born American painter. Yeah. Willem de Kooning was born on April 24th, 1904. Oh, who? Willem de Kooning, who was born on April 24th, 1904, was a Dutch-born American painter who was one of the leading exponents of abstract.
1920, he went to work for the art director of a large department store. In 1926, he entered the United States as a stowaway and eventually settled in Hoboken, New Jersey, in support